Welcome back, everyone, to the College Sports Hive. That is Leif Tulane, and I am Scott Stevens, and we're going to bring you some college basketball in this episode today. It is Monday, and we have a recap of what we previewed for you last week, as well as another preview to touch on some of the big games that are going to happen this week in the grand scheme of things in the college basketball spectrum. So we're going to get started right away here. We both picked some games last week, and somehow we tied at 4-2 apiece with my limited so far college basketball watching and knowledge. Leaf wasn't able to edge me out quite yet, so I guess I was just had the luck of the beginner there for me for sure. But yeah, so we both went 4-2 in our picks. Yeah, what do you have to say? What do you have to say for yourself about that one?
Well, one, I'm a little annoyed at Seton Hall's point guard rolled his ankle in the first 5 minutes of the game, but and then that game was a really great game, 71-70 to Louisville, and they played well, but there was a free throw to tie it that was missed. So it was a good game. I'm not too mad about it. I wish the point guard could have played. It probably would have helped me, but you know what? College basketball is crazy. So I don't expect to go 100% in that.
Absolutely not. No one ever expects that for sure. So a good performance to start our weekly selections off for both of us, sitting there at 4-2. Somehow I made it there. That's kind of shocking to me, as well it is, I'm sure, to everyone else out there. But let's talk about Gonzaga. We had two of their games in our selections, their game over Auburn and then their game over Kansas. They were able to win both of those games. They beat Kansas by a score of 102-90, and then they also took down Auburn 90-67. So they're out fast out of the gates, number one team in the country. What did you make of those two games and their performances so far this season for the number one team in the land?
Yeah, I think it's just that they were clearly the best team in the country the way they played. I think at times that they could have even burst that game even more against Kansas, who came in who was the best team last year, and they had talent returning. Gonzaga has a trio that I don't think any team in the country really has an answer to, of Drew Timme, Jalen Suggs, and Corey Kispert. And they play phenomenally. They play together. They play fast. There's a legitimate chance that Gonzaga, because they play in the WCC, which isn't a bad conference. I want that to be said first, but it's not as good as the ACC, Big 12, Big 10, any of those. There's a chance Gonzaga could really run the table, and they've got a really tough preseason to go, but I loved what I saw. They played fast. They played together. And at times they played good defense too, which is typically the concern about Gonzaga.
For sure. Let's touch on that defense for the first little bit of it. What did we see enough out of their defense to say that they're going to be able to continue this run and just be able to outscore people, but also play solid enough defense to win the turnover battles and keep teams from hanging with them in terms of scoring?
I think they left a little bit to be desired on the defensive end, but at times it was because I felt like they knew they could outscore them. They play such efficient and basketball, shooting threes and getting layups. But defensively, they played a little zone against Kansas that I thought was fairly useless, because it allowed Kansas to get inside, which is the exact opposite of what zone is supposed to do. And they went to man, extended their lead, and then started cruising, clicking on offense. And in Gonzaga's case, the best defense is a good offense. And I really think that'll be what happens for them. And some teams like West Virginia, who they play this week, are really good defensively. So we'll see if they can defend and their offense can help them enough to be a good defensive team. But they really, to me, stood out as the number one team.
I would agree. I think like you touched on, their offense is just super explosive. But let's touch on the fact that they have had two positive tests in their role players for COVID-19. So a little bit to keep an eye on there in terms of what's happening with the number one team in the country. What would you say is your individual performance of the week that you've seen out of the few basketball games that have been played so far?
I think it has to be Luka Garza of Iowa, who by many accounts was the number one returning player. So no surprise there. But he scored 36 points in the first half on 100% shooting. And it wasn't against an amazing competition, but anytime you shoot 100%, regardless of how many shots, especially when you score 36 points, it's definitely worthy of note. And Iowa looks really good, and Luka Garza certainly looks like he hasn't missed a step.
Same question, but a team performance of the week.
thought Houston played a phenomenal game versus Texas Tech. They even went 9 minutes. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. 9 solid minutes without a single point against Texas Tech, and still won by 11. And this is a Texas Tech team that many people considered a top 10 team. So I think Kelvin Sampson's group in Houston is really impressive. And then a little shout out. We didn't preview due to Thanksgiving. We were going to preview the Kentucky Richmond game. And I was looking at Richmond, and I really liked their odds. And shout out to Richmond. They're now ranked, and they upset Kentucky. So those are my two kind of mid-major teams that I really thought impressed. And I really think they're legitimate teams in this season.
Very nice, very nice. All right, so we have some more news moving forward. We had a couple of very big and noteworthy teams that have lost so far in the first week of the season. The University of Virginia lost to San Francisco by 1 point. Villanova lost to Virginia Tech, who is now ranked, but that was coming off of a big win over Arizona State. So that's something that that was a little intriguing to see, but also that's their first loss of the season. And then Kentucky lost to Richmond, like you touched on, which we both kind of agree is not that terrible of a loss. What do you make of these losses so far for these teams, and do you find it concerning or not?
I think the losses themselves weren't. None of them were horrible losses. Virginia lost by 1, and Villanova lost in overtime. And then Kentucky was beaten fairly handily by a very veteran Richmond team, and they're the youngest team in the country, or I should say least experienced, maybe not the youngest. But I don't find any of them to be overly concerning, and I really wouldn't put it past any of those 3 schools, if not all 3, to be ranked in the top 5 again by the end of the season.
Yeah, I think the only one that I would consider concerning would be the Virginia loss to San Francisco, just because San Francisco hasn't necessarily proven to be a powerhouse in college basketball for any stretch of the imagination. And we've seen Virginia lose some games here kind of inexplicably in the past few years. But that being said, it is early, and lack of practice and things like that can play big tolls on teams like this. And early games, you never know what's going to happen. It's college sports, so you're going to have some issues happen sometime throughout your season. It is very easy to bounce. I wouldn't say it's very easy. It's easier to bounce back in college basketball than it is in college football after a loss like this, and it's not necessarily going to derail their entire season, but it's something to look at moving forward, and in my opinion, for that team moving forward. And then, like we touched on, Nova's loss was after a good win against Arizona State, so maybe a little bit tired, maybe a little lackadaisical there. Losing to Virginia Tech, and then Kentucky to Richmond we've talked about. What else do you have for us in terms of news this week in the realm of college basketball?
I think some of the biggest news is that coronavirus hasn't decimated basketball. There's been some cancellations, there's been some postponements, but teams have been able to scramble and make things work. And that's been huge. For instance, the Virginia Tech upset of Villanova happened on a short notice. They made it happen at the last second. Another big one is talented wing freshman for Miami, Earl Timberlake, is out 3 to 5 weeks with an ankle injury. That's an ACC team that's hopefully tournament bound under Jim Larinaga. And then one that I think is really awesome is Josh Langford, he came in with Cassius Winston, Xavier Tillman, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Miles Bridges in that touted class, and he contributed right away. Everyone thought his basketball career was over, and he's back with a foot injury. So I'm happy to see him back. And then lastly, 5-star recruit that committed to Howard was shut down indefinitely with a groin injury. So I think those are the big headlines, but nothing too pressing so far, and hopefully we can get these games off without too many coronavirus delays.
We had some big movers in the top 25 this week. The 3 teams we mentioned lost this week are now moving down in the rankings. Virginia fell from number 4 to number 15. Kentucky fell from number 10 to number 20. And Villanova went from number 3 to number 12, as well as some positive movers. We had Houston move up from number 17 to number 10, as well as Richmond, who was unranked. They moved into the top 25, slotted in there at number 19. What do you make of these moves, and do they all seem valid to you in your eyes?
Yeah, I think you have to compliment people for going up, and you have to adjust accordingly for those who lost games, because you've only seen 2 or 3 games for each team. So I think it's fair. Do I think that Villanova, Virginia, and Kentucky will all get back into the top 10? Yeah, I do. But I think right now you just have to go with what's happened, not who's going to be the best down the road. And then I was really happy to see Richmond and Houston, who I mentioned were my teams of the week, along with San Diego State was another team I really liked. I didn't give them any love there, but I was happy to see all those guys move up. And I honestly was surprised Houston didn't move up further because they beat a really, really good team in Texas Tech.
For sure. Well, and to touch on all that, we have a new top 10 that will go down for you here. We have number 1 holding firm there is Gonzaga. Number 2 is Baylor. Number 3 is Iowa. Number 4, Wisconsin. Number 5, Illinois. Then we have Duke, Kansas, and Michigan State. And then Creighton and Houston round out the top 10. So that's what you're looking at heading into this next week of play. And we'll have some of these teams in huge marquee matchups, mostly taking place this Tuesday. Tomorrow for you all, which just leads us perfectly into the previews for this week for our basketball games. We have first and foremost, number 8 Michigan State is taking on number 6 Duke at Cameron Indoor Stadium, 7:30 Eastern Time on ESPN. What do we make of this huge matchup? 2 blue bloods in the college basketball spectrum, and it's going to be a fun one here to watch for sure.
Yeah, this is a really interesting matchup because neither team, I would say, is really where they will be down the road. And many teams aren't, but these two especially because they lost so much and they're finding their new identity. In Michigan State's case, they lost point guard Cassius Winston, who's a senior, as well as Xavier Tillman, both to the NBA. And Duke, as usual, lost a lot of talent. They lost Trey Jones, who's ACC Player of the Year and Defensive Player of the Year, as well as Vernon Carey, who was Freshman of the Year, and high flyer Cassius Stanley. So these two teams are bringing back some players, but are losing their main contributors. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt and become new teams. I think this will be a really close game because neither team looked phenomenal and have a lot of moving pieces, but they both looked better than like the super youthful teams, and they showed like the coaching class of Tom Izzo and Mike Krzyzewski. That not a lot of programs can support.
Yeah, 2 of the best coaches for sure in the spectrum of college basketball taking center stage in this one here. Is it possible that Duke's a little bit flying under the radar coming into this season? You look at some of their teams in the previous years when they've had Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, teams like that where they've had just so much hype built around them. And now it seems like they don't necessarily have that same aura that they like attracted that year when they had all those stars. Do you think they're a little bit under the radar, or do you think they're pretty measured coming into this one?
Well, I think nationally entering the season, they came in under the radar. I think I was surprised they moved up, frankly, because they struggled against a Coppin State team. And at 6 seems to me kind of they should be at this point. I think they have top 5 talent, absolutely. But they didn't necessarily show it in their one game. But yeah, no, they don't have the appeal that, the aura, like you said, of a Zion team. Like they played Champions Classic that year, blasted Kentucky, and then everyone's like, oh, Duke versus the field. And this year they've got a nicely structured roster, but don't have the allure and luxury of having a guy who's an absolute one and done that you think is going to be the number 1 pick. That said, they do have Jalen Johnson, who in his debut had 19 points and 19 rebounds. So I don't think they're really lacking for talent.
Absolutely. You kind of segmented me perfectly. You have this Jalen Johnson for Duke, and all of that being said, he had a great game against Coppin State. What does Duke have to do to win this game over Michigan State this weekend and take down Tom Izzo and company?
I think, well, first and foremost, they just can't have 22 turnovers like they did against Coppin State. And I think that'll probably be an anomaly because they weren't as engaged. It was the first game. I think they came in kind of sleeping on Coppin State, and Coppin State came in like really amped up. I think Duke really has to rebound well because Michigan State is almost always a lead on the glass. And Duke is trying to employ a small ball lineup with Matthew Hurt at the center. So that'll be a really important to rebound about evenly with Michigan State. And then I think one thing that one of my friends who is a diehard Duke fan mentioned is that they want to get Wendell Moore, their sophomore, who's kind of the X factor in my opinion for them. they want to get him touches and getting going early. And when he's on, they play far better because they have a lot of new pieces, and you want someone who's you can trust and who has developed under Krzyzewski's system before. Want him to get going early. And then lastly, I think you have to limit their fouls and attack Foster Loyer, who played an expanded role replacing Cassius Winston and with Rocket Watts with a nagging injury. He's just an undersized guard for Michigan State, and I think they need to expose his weaknesses and deficiencies defensively to reach their goal of winning this game.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting their inability though a little bit to play the game, to play defense off the bounce. And I think like they got a little bit hurt against Coppin State, which is going to be very, very challenging to fix when they take on this Michigan State team who's full of not to say Coppin State doesn't have good athletes, but more polished athletes and better coaching under Tom Izzo and company. So it's going to be really fun to see how Duke kind of adjusts to what they did against Coppin State and be better, because like we've touched on, Mike Krzyzewski's probably going to have this team better and be playing a more consistent style of basketball, less turnovers and things like that to take on this Spartans team. But then let's flip the script on this one a little bit and talk about Michigan State. What do you think makes them have a good chance to beat Duke and pull off this semi 8-6 upset in Cameron Indoor Stadium, which is a notoriously tough place to play. Not sure about the situation with fans. Excuse me.
Yeah, there are no fans for that game, but if there were, it would be a far bigger upset if it were to happen. I think what Michigan State has that makes them very possible to win this game is that they've got really good depth to the point where it's hard to predict who's going to start for them. They have 7 players averaging north of 6.5 points per game, and they have like 3 or 4 players averaging 10 to 12 points per game. So, you don't know who's going to have great games, which is always, can be concerning, but it's also concerning to the opponent because they don't know who to key in on. And you can get production out of multiple players, which is really important in basketball to have production out of supplementary players. One thing that I think really helps Michigan State is that they have veterans, they have guys with experience that are just new to Tom Izzo's system. For instance, Joey Hauser is a transfer from Marquette. He's started for Marquette as a freshman, and he comes in with experience and a year of sitting out, learning the Tom Izzo system. He's just new in the scheme of playing for the Spartans. Whereas Duke has 4 freshmen that'll play significant minutes this is their second game of collegiate basketball. And then another thing I think that Michigan State does very well is they clean the glass, as I mentioned. They rebound very well, but they also went on a 26-0 run at one point of their game against Notre Dame, proving that they can play really good defense against an ACC school. And I think Duke is obviously better than Notre Dame. But that said, they've already put together that they can play a nice defense, make them shoot from the perimeter, and Duke really struggled hitting threes. So they are well equipped to take on this game. It's just a matter of how well they can play. And then Rocket Watts, point guard for Michigan State, has been dealing with a nagging injury, as I mentioned, and he's their most explosive athlete. So I mean, he'd be huge for penetrating and kicking and driving and dishing like what Coppin State was able to expose Duke at some points. So if he's able to go at close to 100%, that is an enormous factor in this game.
Yeah, like you touched on, it's going to be imperative for Michigan State to be able to get out and close out on shooters and take care of Jalen Johnson in this matchup to ensure that they're going to have the ability to play Duke tough in this Cameron Indoor Stadium, and which fans or no fans is going to be a huge win for Michigan State if they're able to pull it off there over number 6 Duke. Once again, that's Michigan State at Duke, 7:30 Eastern time on ESPN to kick off your basketball week. Going to be a fun one there for sure. We'll transition on to now number 7 Kansas taking on number 20 Kentucky. What do you see in this one? Both teams coming off some interesting performances.
Yeah, no, this is a very classic blue blood matchup that typically you have 2 of the most talented rosters, and they're usually both young. But in this case, Kansas is, I would say, less obviously talented, less riddled with 5 stars, and they're more veteran. And Kentucky, as I mentioned, it is the least experienced team in the nation. They return 0.0 points per game to their roster. because Keon Brooks is out, and if he were to return, it would be about 5 points per game. So obviously they are lacking in returning production. But this game is really interesting because both teams are coming off of subpar performances. Kansas ended up beating St. Joseph's team after being beaten fairly handily by Gonzaga, and Kentucky was just beaten by 12 by Richmond. I think that Kansas has the wings. Christian Brown played a great game. He scored 30 against St. Joseph's and 8 against Gonzaga, so he'll need to be more consistent. And then Ochai Agbaji and Marcus Garrett played both games pretty well. Agbaji scoring 17.5 per game, and Marcus Garrett, kind of the heartbeat of that team, scored 13.5 per game, and he's controlling the pace as a point guard in his transition to point guard. And I think that's a really interesting team to see how they adjust to having less talent. And I think that one thing that we haven't talked about is the scandal that the money scandal that Kansas has dealt with. They're finally being impacted in terms of the recruits that they're getting. And I looked into it. Recruiting-wise, Kansas in 2018 finished 5th, 15th and 19th, 22nd in 2020, and this upcoming season they're 38th. So they are lacking in talent compared to Kentucky, who has finished 1st or 2nd the last 5 years. So I think that's what I see from Kansas's side.
Yeah, it's really interesting to break down that what's happening there with Kansas and see their kind of development issues with their recruiting classes kind of deteriorating a little bit, and watching that play out on the court a little bit with a little bit less talent than some of these teams. And you look at talent and recruiting issues, that's not the case at all against when you talk about Kentucky. They're a team that constantly has great recruiting classes. John Calipari prides himself upon that with that team. And but coming off of that 12-point loss to Richmond, we both kind of stated that that's probably not a terrible loss. That's definitely not going to do anything terrible to their season, but it's something to be touched upon, is how do they bounce back from that loss in a game like this against a blue blood Kansas, and what do they have to do to kind of ensure that they avoid losing 2 straight?
Yeah, they had obvious flaws exposed by Richmond's veteran guards, and that was that they couldn't shoot. They made 0 threes against Richmond, and the veterans of Richmond shut down the young guys of Kentucky. And I think that's something that can happen again. That Kansas has really veteran guards, which is rare in this day and age. Marcus Garrett is a senior. Ochai Agbaji is a junior. Brown has played before. And for Kentucky, like I said, their team is based off freshmen. They're led by uber talented guard Brandon Boston, who's scoring about 18 a game with 9 rebounds from the guard spot. And then Terrence Clark is adding 14 and 5. But that said, that these points aren't going to be easy to come by against Kansas, because they play really good perimeter defense despite the 102 points that they gave up against Gonzaga. Gonzaga is a juggernaut. And I think they have to hit threes, and they hit 0. And Kansas, I think, will be able to pack the paint, slide with them defensively, and make life really tough on Kentucky unless they shoot considerably better. And obviously, it's probably hard to hit 0 threes 2 games in a row, but they're going to need they're going to need at least 7 to win this game, in my opinion.
Yes.
And
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh yeah. And I think that their point guard play for Kentucky is a worry, because Devin Askew is a freshman, but he also reclassified up, and you can see that this speed of the game is hard for him. He's trying to control it. And Marcus Garrett, for the other side, is a 22-year-old who's won Defensive Player of the Year in the Big 12. So it's a very interesting matchup, and I think Kentucky has a lot of things to work on, but they'll have to play inside out to win this game, because Olivier Sarr is their only veteran transfer from Wake Forest, and Isaiah Jackson is just a freak athlete at the 4.
It's going to be a really good one here for sure. I think it's really interesting to see for Kentucky. We in the first episode we did about college basketball, we were like, it's going to be better for shooters to shoot in empty gyms and things like that, and that usually leads to higher shooting percentages. And here they come and have struggles from the perimeter and shooting. And I do think it's going to be very imperative to get some traction early inside, and then be able to get the respect of the defense to crash down a little bit and have some open shooters on the wing. And they're going to need to knock down those shots when they're able to get them, to be able to compete with this Kansas team. So this is going to be another good one. Anything else you want to add here before we transition a little bit?
I think this game will Kentucky will want to play fast and Kansas will want to slow it down because Kentucky has the athletes that it doesn't matter if you're able to get back. If they can score in transition, that'll spell trouble regardless of how raw their team is and how far from their ceiling that they are. And then lastly, I wonder, one thing to look for is who can win the inside battle between Olivier Sarr and David McCormick. We didn't even mention McCormick, and he's one of their most talented recruits, one of the holdovers from their better recruiting classes that he contributed to. And he's been relatively silent, averaging 8 points and 6 rebounds per game. And he needs to play better against Isaiah Jackson and Olivier Sarr, who were the best 2 players. I guess most 2 consistent players in Kentucky's first 2 games. So those are a couple things to look out for.
Absolutely. And we touched on the coaching in the first game between Michigan State and Duke. This is going to be another good one with John Calipari and Bill Self-Field. So we expect these teams to be disciplined, expect them to improve upon the performances that they've had earlier in the year. And I think this is going to be another fun one to watch moving forward in the week of college basketball. All right, with that being said, we have one more preview for you. We have number 2 Baylor taking on number 5 Illinois in the Jimmy V Classic on Wednesday. Baylor is now 2-0. They had that COVID issue with their head coach and the coaching staff early on in the game. Hasn't seemed to affect them on the court with wins over Louisiana and Washington by 30 points each. What do we make of this Baylor team sitting at number 2 in the country, and what do they have to do to continue to impress and sit in that spot for as long as they can?
Yeah, apologies to Baylor. I put them outside my top 5 initial top 5 after I heard Scott Drew was out, their head coach, and Tristan Clark opted out of the season because of recurring knee injuries. They came out and proved that they don't need a big man to be great. They just need to score, and they put up crazy numbers. That said, they have four guards that play and are averaging over 12 points a game, led by Jared Butler's 18.5 and 4.5 assists. They have excellent chemistry. All these guys played a season ago, and Davion Mitchell is, along with Marcus Garrett, who we touched on for Kansas, is the other best perimeter defender in the country, and he'll be enormous in this matchup against Ayo Dosunmu for Illinois. I was stunned by the offensive output of Baylor. They're typically a defensive team. They're very defensively oriented, and now that they're scoring, they're super dangerous. I've been super impressed by them. And the one thing I worry about is because of Kofi Cockburn for Illinois, he's a behemoth of a man, that the lack of the experience inside could come up to cost them. But they're super well coached, and they actually have had experience playing someone like Kofi Cockburn, and that came in the form of Udoka Azubuike. In one game where Baylor played Kansas, they absolutely shut him down with a ton of weak side help due to their no middle offense. They decided to sag off the corner guy, make him beat them, and double Kofi Cockburn, or in this case Udoka Azubuike. I expect that to be the game plan. But I think Illinois will have watched that game, and the second time, Azubuike dominated Baylor with some play. So that's something to watch for. And I think they just need to rebound it close to even. They don't have to win the rebounding battle. They just can't be pummeled inside by Kofi Cockburn's size.
Yeah, you touched on that issue there with Baylor in terms of guarding the big man. That was going to be one of the big keys for the game for Illinois, in my opinion. Is they're sitting now at 3-0 on the season. They had a close call against an Ohio team, but they're still returning their 2 best players, Bill Walton, and one other guy. And so, what do you make of this Illinois team moving forward? And what is the ceiling for this team? And what do they have to do, more importantly, to win this game against Baylor in this huge marquee matchup early on in the season?
Well, I think the ceiling for both of these teams is they're both national championship contenders. And I rarely say that a team this early is a national championship contender, but I think legitimately both of these teams are. I think the contributions, Ayo Dosunmu right now is probably the favorite for player of the year. He's averaging 26 points, 8 rebounds, and 7 assists per game. Obviously, those numbers probably won't persist, but incredible numbers. And Kofi Cockburn, Bill Walton, like you said, likened them to Kobe and Shaq of college basketball. And I mean, that's extreme, but it really is one of the best duos, if not the best duo in basketball. And then what's impressed me about Illinois is they've gotten great contributions out of 4 guards, and 2 of them were seniors and 2 of them were freshmen making immediate impacts, led by Adam Miller's 28 per game. Not 28, 18 per game. That would be a really high scoring team if it was 28. 18 per game as a freshman, and then they have 4 guards averaging about a little north of 8 points outside of Ayo Dosunmu. So they've got depth, and Brad Underwood's a really good defensive coach. So this is a really intriguing battle. 2 teams that are overperforming their offensive expectations that have defensive DNAs. So this is one of the more intriguing matchups in all of college basketball to me.
Yeah, it's gonna be one of the best games in the year, in my opinion, as well. I think it's gonna be just super imperative to see who's able to win inside in this game and set up their shooters from the outside, to be able to bury some big shots, and that can be the keys in this game. One of the things that I'll look at is runs in this one. Runs play a huge factor in every college basketball game, but I think for both teams, if they're on the bad end of a bad run, like 11-1, something higher like that. If a team goes silent for a while, I don't think they'll be able to come back in this game with the way that Baylor is able to score and things like that. So especially for for Illinois, that's more important for them is to not have offensive lulls. But I think it's going to be really cool to see what happens in this one. One of the better games of the year, more importantly. What do you think about what's going to be the role of the pick and roll in this game, especially with Baylor, who's going to struggle to cope with big men?
Yeah, so that is the biggest part of this game. Schematically, I think, is how the teams can play the big men situation. Kofi Cockburn is going to dominate inside. That's a given. He'll get a dunk or two. He'll get a lot of offensive rebounds. The question is, can you play him out of the game by playing super fast to the point where he's not able to get back on defense, or is the pick and roll going to dominate the game and you're not able to defend it if you're Baylor? And then conversely, if you're Illinois, can you establish Cockburn as a dominant factor, keep him out of foul trouble, and play that to the point where Baylor has to play big, where they've been trying to play small? So the pick and roll is enormous in this game to see if they can establish Cockburn early and often with Ayo Dosunmu running the point, or if Baylor can negate it with Mark Vidal, their super glue guy, coming over from the help side like they often tried to do against Udoka Azubuike, one time working flawlessly and the other not working very well at all. So I think that's the biggest part of this game is how well Kofi Cockburn can impact this game offensively, or if he can stay in the game with foul trouble and the pace that Baylor is trying to play this season. That's a huge matchup. And honestly, in terms of X's and O's, this is one of the more, and player personnel, this is one of the best matchups in all of college basketball. And I don't say that lightly because there are tons of great matchups to come.
All right, like we touched on, it's going to be one of the best ones of the year. That's number 2 Baylor versus number 5 Illinois in the Jimmy V Classic there on Wednesday. Another great matchup for this week, chock full of them for things like that. It's a top 5 matchup. And speaking of the top 5, we listed the top 5 of the AP poll earlier on in this episode, but let's hear your revised, or if there are any changes to your previous top 5, and what's your opinion of them so far?
Well, I think I have to change it because I had both Villanova and Virginia in it. And I do think one of those 2 teams, I'll keep that a secret for another time, is going to return to the top 5. Number 1 is Gonzaga, and I think it's by a long shot. Number 2, I've got Baylor. They've impressed me. I issued my apology already to them. Number 3, this is going to be coming as a shock, Houston. I think Houston, Kelvin Sampson's group is incredible defensively. They didn't shoot the ball well at all, and they still won by 11 against a team in Texas Tech that is got title aspirations written on them. I don't know if they're going to get there, but they certainly are a team that you have to respect because they were just in the national championship game when it last happened, and they're only getting better recruits. Shout out Kelvin Sampson. I think he's the most underrated coach in college basketball. 4, I've got Illinois. So we've got 2 versus 4 in this. I think Illinois, because they dominated 2 bad teams and they played a close call against Ohio. But Ohio had an NBA type guard in Jason Preston, and they were able to show resilience in a tough game with freshmen being new, and they relied on Kofi Cockburn and Ayo Dosunmu. I think that some of that resilience will show up and be something that proves more than some of these blowout wins like that of Iowa. Transitioning to 5, I have a 3-way tie, which I know is kind of cheating, But I think it's the other three teams in the in the Big Ten, because Michigan State went on a 26-0 run against Notre Dame. That's awesome. Wisconsin has dominated their two opponents, but they haven't played anyone. They play Marquette later this week, which we'll have in a preview next time. And Iowa has absolutely dominated. Luka Garza has been phenomenal. They're number 3 in the AP poll. If I had to put a bet, I would put Iowa number 5 if I had to. But I love Connor McCaffrey, makes great decisions there. Fran McCaffrey's group has improved depth from past seasons, and their defense looks to be coming along, which is always their worry. So those are my top 7 that I counted as a top 5.
You heard it here first. That's our top 5 for this week. I'm still going to hold off judgment. I'll make one next week after seeing some more of these games, getting to know the players and the teams more and all that good stuff. I'll just throw in some stuff there next week. I will say I do like your number 1, 2, number 1 and 2. I do think Baylor and Gonzaga are the best 2 teams in the country as of right now. Houston, I would say I agree with you that they're definitely worthy of having some national notoriety. I'm not sure I'm necessarily ready to throw them into the number 3 spot if I were to make my own, but I would be able to be convinced to put them in at number 5, number 6, fringes of that top 5 for sure. I think Illinois is a good team, so I'd probably slot them in around number 3, and then have 2 of the other Big Ten schools, and potentially Duke. I think you could question Duke having some notoriety. It's going to be really interesting for me, at least, to see the way Duke plays Michigan State. I would say those are my fringe 4 and 5 teams personally, so I'm really excited for that one in particular. So with all that being said, we're gonna go ahead and pick some of these games. We're gonna start off. We're calling it our Elite 8 of the week. So do you want to take the reins on this and kind of guide us through it?
Sure. So yeah, I love me some March Madness, and I thought I'd put a little twist in this. So we got the Elite 8 of the week, and then we will have our last 2 games being the Champions Classic. We'll give you a prediction of the score as well. So let's start off with one game that is a very marquee matchup, which is Gonzaga versus West Virginia at the Jimmy V Classic. Same event as Illinois and Baylor. West Virginia won the Bad Boy Mowers, what usually is the Battle for Atlantis, but they played in Sioux Falls. So, COVID changed that, who's playing, but they still won the event. And so we got number 1 versus number 11, and we didn't preview it because that's how good a week we've got here. And we've talked about Gonzaga twice already. So who do you have in this one?
I'm going to stick with Gonzaga. I think they've just been too dominant moving in their first couple games of the season so far. I think West Virginia is a great team. They'll hang with them for probably a half and a half, if that makes sense, like 3/4 of the game. But I think Gonzaga will have a stretch where they kind of their talent starts to show up in large quantities here and be able to go on a run that kind of puts West Virginia away. I'm not necessarily sure it's going to get to the point where you're going to have to win it via foul shots and fouling and all that good stuff that prolongs so many basketball games. But I like Gonzaga in this one over a good West Virginia team.
Yeah, I do too. I think West Virginia is one of the few teams that Gonzaga really struggles with traditionally, that a team that can physically bother them and play 48 minutes of, not 48, that's NBA, 40 minutes of pressure basketball and physical. Florida State upset Gonzaga a few years ago in the tournament, and Mark Few said that teams like West Virginia and Florida State are those that give them the most trouble. But that said, I'm still going with Gonzaga. I think that their trio is electric, and they have the ability to put up points, and West Virginia is not a very good offensive team. They're great defensively, but I don't think they can put up enough points, and Gonzaga is elite offensively. I think a great matchup for NBA scouts especially is Drew Timme versus Oscar Tshiebwe and Derek Culver. Tshiebwe is an amazing athlete, but both he and Culver are extremely foul prone, and Drew Timme is the most skilled big man in college basketball. So I think advantage Drew Timme there. But I wonder if Gonzaga can't go as small as they like to go and push the pace. They'll have to play a little bigger. But yeah, I still got Gonzaga, and I think it's by a decent margin, but expect a tougher competition for Gonzaga than they've faced so far. Next up, we're going to go with Illinois Baylor, staying at the Jimmy V Classic. Who do you have in this one? This is a great matchup, as we talked about.
Yeah, super good one. I just think, like I touched on it's going to be a game of runs. I think Illinois is just not going to be able to necessarily survive some of the onslaught of the runs that Baylor is capable of going on with that offense, like we touched on. So I'm going to go Baylor in this one. I do like Illinois, and your points about the big man issue and covering the big man is very scary to me, and to in this pick of picking Baylor. But I think they'll be able to figure it out just enough, and also be able to outscore Illinois in this one. It's going to be a tremendous game. I think it's probably going to be easily within 10 points. It's going to be a fun one to watch for sure in the Jimmy V Classic, and I'm really intrigued to hear what you have to say, because as of right now, I'm looking at IDK written on our list here.
I think I've made my decision, and I'm going with Baylor as well. And here's why. I think that when you have guards that have experience and they're scoring at a higher rate, it translates better than that of freshman guards for Illinois. And I think Adam Miller and Andre Corbello are really great players, but they haven't faced the likes of Jared Butler, Maceo Teague, and Davion Mitchell, all of whom have played at least 3 years of high-level Division I basketball. Jared Butler is a third-team All-American last season. That said, Ayo Dosunmu is the best player on the court, and I would not be surprised at all if he has a statement game and wins this game for Illinois. As for the big man, Kofi Coburn versus the lack of bigs for Baylor, Baylor does have two centers we didn't talk about a lot in Flo Thamba and Jonathan Tachua. I don't even want to try pronouncing his name, actually. Well, I'm just going to call him JTT for the point of this. I think they can match with him enough and cause him to – and they're fast. They're thin and fast. I think that they're going to establish a pace where Kofi isn't comfortable, and he get his – fitness level, just because he's so big, doesn't allow him to play the factor inside as dominantly. So I'm going to go with Baylor and trust the experience of the guards overall. But like I said, this is a crapshoot type of game. I would never bet on this type of game. I'm very excited to watch it. And also, I just want to put a quick plug for Jimmy V. If you haven't watched Survive in Advance, the 30 for 30, do go watch that and donate to Jimmy V, the foundation, because it's a great fund. A great coach for Jim Valvano, that is. So I just wanted to say that before we get out of here. So moving on from the Jimmy V Classic, we got Louisville and Western Kentucky. Louisville has 3-0, and Western Kentucky is 2-1, losing to West Virginia in the championship of the Bad Boy Mowers. Who do you have in this one?
I'm going to stick with Louisville. I think they didn't lead me astray in my picks last week, so I'm going to stick with Louisville. I know Western Kentucky has played well in that opening tournament of theirs and losing to West Virginia in the championship game, but I'm going to stick with Louisville. I'm going to stick with their playmakers and what they're building there and just roll with them. When you got the hot hand, you can't let it go, right?
Yeah, no, it worries me to pick against Louisville twice. I love David Johnson. He's maybe my favorite point guard in college basketball. He's a fabulous passer. And they also have another guard in Carlick Jones, a grad transfer from Radford, who's done a great job. Louisville's bigs, surprised me. They had a guy named Dre Davis play a really good game against Sandro Mamukelashvili of Seton Hall. And they played well. But Slick Rick, as he's called, Rick Stansbury, the coach of Western Kentucky, did a great job coaching. And Charles Bassey is an elite big man. And they also have Tavion Hollingsworth. So I'm going to go with the upset. I'm taking Western Kentucky. I honestly like you, Louisville. I'm sorry for picking against you, but I'm going to try this one. I want an upset. So with that said, we got some basketball schools that have some tradition. We got Indiana and Providence. Who do you have? And that's in the Maui Classic that starts today. In fact, Texas just played Davidson and pulled off a very tight win. But in the Maui Classic played in Asheville this year, who do you have between Indiana and Providence in the first round?
It's just hard for me to get behind the Maui Classic being played in Asheville, North Carolina. But it's so notoriously cool to watch the Maui Classic in Maui, and all of those teams go down there and compete in that fun opening season tournament there. With that being said, I'm going to go with Indiana. I'm not necessarily too familiar with either of the teams, truth be told, but with that being said, I do think the Big Ten is very good this year in basketball, and I'm going to roll with the Big Ten and pick Indiana in this one.
No, I'm going with you on this one. I love what Indiana's got this year. They return a lot of players, and Trace Jackson Davis being the most important of them. I think he's an All-American candidate, best player on the floor. And they also have some fresh impact freshmen and a mix of some supporting cast players that really, I think, fit very nicely. Ed Cooley's a great coach at Providence, but I don't think he has the same level of talent. Watch out for David Duke, though, for Providence. He's a great player as well. But I'm going Indiana. Next up, we got one on the West Coast. We've been all over the place. We've kind of ended up in North Carolina a little bit. Let's go over to the West Coast. We got USC and BYU. This is an interesting. What do you have?
I'm going to go BYU in this one, I think. As much as I want to pick the Pac-12 and the Power 5 conference there, I'm going to stick with BYU. They had a tremendous year last year and one of their better seasons in program history with basketball. They've always had good basketball teams down there in Provo. So I'm going to roll with BYU over USC in this one, and we'll see. We'll see what happens. I'm not necessarily too sure about that one.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think BYU lost a lot from last season, but they were a legitimate threat to be a Sweet 16 Elite 8 team based on the way they offensively played the ball. And they lost Yoli Childs, they lost TJ Haws and Jake Toolson. But they still retain Alex Barcelo, and they got transfer from Purdue, Matt Harms. And I think that I'm going to go with BYU. I love the way they play basketball. I love the way they pass. They're playing well in the season. I watched them play Utah Valley University, and they passed the eye test. USC, they have a lot of talent. They got Mobley, both Mobley brothers, one of whom, Evan, is a legitimate lottery pick. But I don't think they play well together, and I think BYU's chemistry and maturity, because a lot of them are Mormon missionaries and they're older, that'll play a role in this game. So I'm going BYU as well. Next up, we've got in the Maui Invitational, played in Asheville. We've got Alabama and Stanford in an intriguing first-round matchup. Who do you have?
I'm just gonna go out and say I got Alabama. I know you're a big Pac-12, big Stanford guy, but I'm gonna go against the Cardinal here and pick Alabama. Sorry about it.
So, the sad part is I really wish I could say I want Stanford to win. So we try to keep bias out of this. I am a diehard Stanford fan. And that said, I'm going with Alabama as well. And the reason for it is Stanford is in California, and the Santa Clara County in which Stanford is located has not allowed basketball to be played very much. So they have not been practicing indoors. They've been playing outdoors. I'm going with Alabama. And if you're not in shape and you're playing Alabama and Nate Oates, they get up and down the floor at one of the fastest tempos of anyone. So I'm sorry to my Stanford team. I hope you win. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Scott's wrong. But I'm going Alabama. All right, so we got our games of the week, the Champions Classic. This is an event that since I've been a little boy, have always watched and I've very much enjoyed. So we got Michigan State at Duke. Who do you have in this one?
What a tremendous matchup here between Michigan State and Duke. With that being said, I'm going to go against Mike Krzyzewski, which just sounds terribly wrong to say. But I'm going to go Michigan State and Tom Izzo. I got 85-77 with the final. I just think Michigan State's going to be able to shoot a little bit better than Duke will be able to, and it's just going to come down to who has the lead going in the last final minutes. And I think with Duke, we didn't really touch on they struggled to shoot from the free throw line last weekend, in their matchup against Coppin State as well. So they have a lot to kind of build off of a kind of an ugly 10-point win, truth be told. So I'm going to go Michigan State, and hopefully that holds up that would be my one upset pick.
Yeah, this is one I again have an I can't decide. I've been thinking about this for the better part of 2 days, and I still don't really know. But I will go with. Ooh, this is really hard. I'm gonna go with Duke. Wow. I don't even like. I'm gonna be honest. I don't like Duke. I think the stigma of them getting all the recruits rubs me the wrong way. I root for the underdog very often. I think they have more talent on their roster, and a lot of their mistakes are fixable. I think Jalen Johnson is a matchup problem. I honestly kind of hope I'm wrong, which is I don't like doing that. I think Jalen Johnson's a matchup nightmare for Michigan State. Joey Hauser is a good player, really good player, but he's not a defensive specialist. Thomas Kithier, the other player that they're playing up front, I don't think either can really guard Jalen Johnson, and he creates a lot of problems. I also think Duke will be really motivated to go after a subpar performance. So I'm going to go with Duke. I think I'm going to go with 80 82 to 70, 79, like a really close game. I think Rocket Watts not being healthy is one that I think that's what sways me. If Foster Loyer has to play extended minutes against the extremely talented guards of Duke, he'll be exposed. I'm rooting for Michigan State though. So that's my pick. All right, so Kansas and Kentucky, two blue bloods, two teams that wear blue. We got UK versus KU. Who are you going with?
Really good one here again in this matchup of great coaches. I'm going to go with Kentucky, though. With that being said, I think with that being said, though, they have struggled to shoot from the perimeter in their couple of games, which is going to have a huge impact on this one. So that scares me a little bit, but I think they're going to be able to clean that up. And they just have the athletes, in my opinion, to be able to put on the floor and gel together a little bit better in this one against Kansas. I'm not saying that it's going to be a shootout in any stretch of the imagination. I'm actually going to go 75-68 for the final score. I think there's going to be good defense played. I think it's going to be fast paced. But I'm going to go Kentucky to beat Kansas in this one.
Yeah, I think they've got incredible talent and superior talent in this matchup. But I'm going Kansas. I think Bill Self is at this point is better with his team. Calipari is still trying to find out what he's got and who will emerge as the lead players. I'm going with Kansas 72-66. I think the biggest matchup for me in this game is Marcus Garrett could be guarding Brandon Boston, and that's primetime television. Just on an individual matchup, he's a phenomenal defender, and Brandon Boston is a premier scorer. So I'm going to go with the experience of Kansas. I think that Agbaji can score. He's played in a lot of these big games. I think that Christian Brown has got a little pep in his step after a 30-point performance. He'll hit some open threes. I think David McCormick is the biggest player in this game. He has to have a good game against Olivier Sarr and Isaiah Jackson. So I'm going to roll with the experience of Kansas over the youth of Kentucky in this game. I think I'd change my pick the further on in the season, but since it's the third game of the season for both teams, I'm going to go with Kansas.
All right, that's going to do it for us in their Elite Eight selections this week. It's going to be a fantastic weekend of ahead of college basketball. We'll be back actually with you on Friday to preview some more matchups over the weekend. It's going to be a very front-loaded week. That's why we did a bunch to start off this week. But actually, before we're back with you Friday, we'll have an episode Wednesday for you. That's our football preview and news episode combined there to touch base on what's happening in terms of the college football week next week. And then just go out and enjoy yourself this week. Have fun watching some great college basketball games. Some of the best matchups you'll see all year long. Do you have anything else to say, Leif, before we sign off for the day?
No, I think you covered it all there. And just check out the Jimmy V Foundation real quickly and see the cause. And if you have the time or ESPN account, watch the 30 for 30 Survive in Advance. It'll hit you in the feels. It'll make this event even better. So that's all I've gotten. I hope you enjoy this week of great college sports.
Yeah, that's going to do it for Leif and I on the College Sports Hive. We'll be back with you, like we said, Wednesday for our football news and preview. And until then, enjoy yourselves and enjoy some college basketball. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.